Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari. Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Padjana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Padjana Ranjana. Yamunatira Vanachari. Yamunatira Vanachari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, move it over. That's good, that's good. Hey, Hare Ram, Ram Ram. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Mr. Paramahamsa, Parudikacharya Ashtotar, the Srimad Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa, Parudikacharya Ashtotar, the Srimad Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur ki Jai. Ananda Koti Vaishnava ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki Jai, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Hari Bol. Welcome. Hare Krishna. So, let's see what verse we are on now. We did 55 for sure.
I think 59, Prabhu.
Is it 59?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 20th day of December 2021 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in chapter 18 entitled Conclusion, the Perfection of Renunciation, text number 59 on page 699. Okay. Yad ahankaram ashritya nayotsya iti manyase mityaisha vivasyaste prakritis tvam niyokshyati yadahankaramashritya nayotsya iti manyase mityaisha vivasyaste prakritis tvam niyokshati yadahankaramashritya nayotsya iti manyase mityaisha vivasyaste prakritis tvam niyokshati yadahankaramashritya nayotsya iti manyase mityaisha vivasyaste prakritis tvam niyokshati yadahankaramashritya nayotsya iti manyase mityaisha vivasyaste prakritis tvam niyokshati yadahankaramashritya nayotsya iti manyase mityaisha vivasyaste prakritis tvam niyokshati. Prakash. Yadahankaramashritya nayotsya iti manyase mityaisha vivasyaste prakritis tvam niyokshati. Time out. Time out. Do you have the right page? 699. 696. Oh, you're on it. Okay. Just wanted. We're reading the Sanskrit. If you don't have to read, if you don't want. 59. 59. You have 706. You have a different book. You have a different book too. I can see the little margins. Text 59. Yeah, we have two of them now. Yours is also not on 690. Sorry about that. Okay, you're up. Yadahankaramashritya nayotsya iti manyase mityaisha vivasyaste prakritis tvam niyokshati. Ladies? No? Okay, no, you don't have to do it. Anyone in Zoom land?
Yadahankaramashritya nayostya iti manyase
nayotsya iti manyase
mithyesha vyavasayaste
mityaisha vivasyaste
prakritistvam niyokshati
prakritimstvam niyokshati
Yadahankaram
yadahankaramashritya
nayotsya iti manyase
nayotsya iti manyase
mityaisha vyavasayaste
mityaisha vivasyaste
prakritistvam niyokshati
prakritistvam niyokshati. One more.
Yadahankaram ashritya
Yadahankaram ashritya
nayotsya iti manyase
nayotsya iti manyase
mityaisha vivasayaste
mityaisha vasayaste
prakritistvam niyokshati.
prakritistvam niyokshati. Yet if ahankaram of false ego, ashritya, taking shelter, nayotsye, I shall not fight, iti, thus, manyase, you think. Mithya eshaha, this is all false. Vivasayaha, determination. Te, your prakriti, material nature, tvam, you, niyokshati, will engage. Translation. Krishna speaks to Arjuna, if you do not act according to my direction and do not fight, then you will be falsely directed. By your nature, you will have to be engaged in warfare. Purport. Arjuna was a military man and born of the nature of the Kshatriya. Therefore, his natural duty was to fight. But due to false ego, he was fearing that by killing his teacher, grandfather, and friends, he would incur sinful reactions. Actually, he was considering himself master of his actions, as if he were directing the good and bad results of such work. He forgot that the Supreme Personality of Godhead was present there, instructing him to fight. That is the forgetfulness of the conditioned soul. The Supreme Personality gives directions as to what is good and what is bad, and one simply has to act in Krishna consciousness to attain the perfection of life. No one can ascertain his destiny as the Supreme Lord can. Therefore, the best course is to take direction from the Supreme Lord and act. No one should neglect the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead or the order of the Spiritual Master, who is the representative of God. One should act unhesitatingly to execute the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That will keep one safe under all circumstances. Om jnana timarandasya jnanandana shalakaya chakshu udmilitam mena tasmai shri gurave namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto him and all members of Sri Parampara, the disciplic succession. So here again we have an instance of Krishna giving a very stark contrast. Previous verse, he's very hopeful. Mat chitta mat sarvadurgani mat prasada tarishyasi. If you become conscious of me, you will pass over all the obstacles of conditioned life by my grace. But if, however, you do not work in such consciousness, but act through false ego, not hearing me, you will be lost. And he reiterates that in the very beginning of this verse, Yadahankaram ashritya, if you take shelter of false ego. Boy, no water, not even an empty cup. Which you usually get. So taking shelter of false ego, what is this ahankara? It's interesting that if you break it down, it means I am the doer. I am independent in my will to act. And it's based on identifying oneself with the body that one's have, gross and subtle. We have two bodies. We have the gross body that we commonly call the body, everyone knows. But we also have the subtle body composed of mind, intelligence, and ego. Now, when that sense of self is completely focused on this gross and subtle body, this is called the false ego. And that's mentioned right in this word-by-word meanings. So taking shelter of it means to act on this false identification, rather than thinking I'm a spirit soul, I'm part and parcel of Krishna, I'm an eternal servant of the Supreme Spirit. Arjuna was identifying himself with his, according to his bodily relationships, specifically with his teacher, with his grandfather, Bhishma Dev, with all of the relatives and friends he had on the other side. And he, on that basis, it didn't make any sense to fight. He said, what's the point of me fighting? If I win the battle, then there will be tremendous bloodshed either way. And the spoils I get, the kingdom will be tainted with the blood of the people who I love. What's the point? I'd rather go off to the forest, become a beggar, and have them live. You figure that on a bodily concept, that would be the most logical thing to do. But here Krishna is saying in the previous verse, if you act according to my desire, you will get my grace, and you will cross over all the difficulties. And that includes the internal difficulties of his doubts and his sense of despair. That will dissipate. That's the idea. But if you don't hear me, and he mentioned this word ahankara again in the second line of the previous verse, nashoshasi, if you don't hear me. In other words, if you don't hear me properly, it's not just a physical process of hearing the words. It's what we sing every morning. Guru mukha padma bhakta chitte te koriya aika arna koriya manayasha. This is, for me, this is like the most important instruction in that verse, in that song. Guru mukha padma bhakya. From the lotus mouth of the guru, he's speaking so many words. Chitte te koriya aika. Make your mind, your consciousness one with those words, and don't desire anything else. This is a big order because we're used to getting a little from here, a little from there, and formulating our own ideas, acting on it, making a mistake, trying again. This is our means. We're not accustomed to having an absolute source of knowledge that we can trust. This is the right thing to do. Even though according to calculations on the bodily concept of something that seems wrong. But we're not the body, so we have to surrender. That's what surrender means. Again, going back to the end of the 16th chapter, where Krishna very distinctly says, if you just act whimsically, you'll never become happy, you'll never get perfection, you'll never achieve the supreme goal. He said, Yak shastra vidim utsrija vartate kamakatataha nasa siddhim abaptodni nasukam naparamgatim. If you discard the instruction of the Shastra, which is the scripture such as Bhagavad Gita, as given to us by a pure devotee, so it's as it is, and continue to act according to your own whims, your own desires, that you acquired through your experience in this world, then you'll never be able to get perfection or happiness or go to the supreme goal. So we want happiness. We want the supreme goal, which is back to Godhead, ending birth and death. And so who doesn't want these things? But you'll never attain it by your own mental speculation. And therefore, he says, Tasmat tvam indriyam yado, Tasmat shastram pamanam te karya vavastito. If you want to really determine what the best thing to do is, and what the best thing is to avoid are, there's always two sides of it, what not to do and what to do. Then you have to consult the Shastra, the revealed scripture. And that's such the Bhagavad Gita as it is, and the Srimad Bhagavatam, all the other books, Srimad Bhagavad Gita. The cream is the essence of all the Vedic instructions. And here we are at the end of the 18th chapter, and Krishna is going to give us the essence of the essence. Now he's giving it, and it's coming finally in a few verses. We may not reach it tonight, but this week we'll definitely reach it. So again, he says, ahankar, this is the danger. The whole problem is we've established for ourselves a false identity separate from Krishna, completely forgetting him, consisting of its gross and subtle body. But they're always changing. And so our sense of self is always changing, even in this one lifetime. We've all been little children. We have that identity, right? And, it's a strange world full of amazing things and dangers and, ups and downs emotionally. Gradually, you grow older and you change. Now I'm getting a little older. I'm no longer 5. I'm 5.5, like that. And so you get in adolescence, a whole different set of things happen, internally and externally. So our concept of ourselves is constantly changing because we're involved in this gross and subtle body as who we are. And then you get older, and you have so many things. You have to get married, you get children, do you identify with that? These are my children. I have to really, identify with their happiness and try to make them happy. And so it's all an expansion. It's described by Rishabdev. It says, Ata griha cheta sutta apta vitta janasimoho yamahamameti. That the ordinary course of events, man meets woman, girl meets boy, and in certain cases they get married, and then you have children, and then you have to have a job and money, and you have to have a place, and you have all the relatives. In any real civilization, there's also a lot of in-laws that you're concerned with now, Some of them may live with you. And Janasimo, it generates false ego, yamaham mameti, which is characterized as I am this gross and subtle body, and the things related to it are mine. But the first thing we learn in Krishna consciousness is that everything belongs to God. Everything really belongs to Krishna. Why not? It's his energy. We learn in Bhagavad Gita, if we believe it, that bhuma, apa, onano, vayu, these things that make up our environment, solid matter, right? Liquids, gases, radiant energy, like light and electricity, and space. That's another subtle energy. Then the more subtle, the mind, intelligence, ego, all of these are inanimate. Very, very subtle when they get inside. But they're not us. And besides those, there's the superior energy, the living entity. So they're all Krishna's energies. So what doesn't what is not connected to him? What is not his? You see? He's created this place for our reformation. This is not our home. This material world cannot be our permanent home. It's constantly changing. We're constantly changing as bodies and so forth. But the soul remains unchanged, as it were. So we want to get back to that eternal abode where there's no birth, death, old age, disease, destruction, and no misery. You know, that's the back home, back to Godhead. So we're exiles. We're in a reformatory, a prison, if you will. Durga means you can't go. That's the name of the goddess. Can't go. And that's what the prison means. You may have so many ideas, but you can't go. That's the main thing about a prison. But we can go if we get the blessings of the prison warden or the governor. Krishna is the ultimate governor and president. He can welcome us back. So this verse, the present verse, if we take shelter, meaning that we focus on our false identity, which is dictating to Arjuna, I will not fight. His whole argument in the first chapter, second, I will not fight. He said, this is all false. Mityaisha, because it's based on the false premise of who you are. Vyavasayas. You remember this word vyavasaya? Vyavasayatmaka buddhir? That spiritually, one should have a very fixed determination in one's intelligence to advance in devotional service, because it requires discipline. He said, in the beginning, you have to control the senses. Right now, the senses are controlling us. So you see something attractive, you go there, you hear something, like that. And the tongue is pulling you one way, all these things. But you have to control it. There are certain rules and regulations. You have in mind, for elevation of the consciousness, the senses need to be controlled and engaged in Krishna's service. You want to see beautiful things, there you can see the beautiful deity. You want to hear beautiful sounds, you can hear Hare Krishna, beautiful song, And we have, you want to taste things, we have beautiful prasadam. The senses can be engaged in Krishna's service. And that is the beginning. The beginning is the tongue, the chanting of the name and the tasting of prasadam. And with the chanting, of course, the hearing has to be there. So all the senses, both active and knowledge acquiring, the ears, the sense of taste and the touch and all those senses, of course the sight, they can be connected to Krishna in yoga. And that's the process of devotional service. But it requires discipline, instruction, how to do it. Any skill you want to acquire, any path you want to tread, you want to become a champion golfer or whatever it is, you have to find someone who's a teacher in golf, you have to practice, you have to train your the stroke, everything. Right? You got to go from here to there. And so the same thing is there in spades and spiritual life. You're training your whole being by surrender, by coming under the instruction of a pure devotee who is already there and who embodies the principles and who's living it and who's mercifully teaching, taking the trouble to teach and make environments that we can learn in. So here Krishna lays it right down on the line. This is all false. If you're gonna fight anyway because it's your nature. That's the prakritis tvam niyokshati. Nature, and your nature will engage you anyway. But if you fight simply because it's your nature rather than as an act of surrender to me, that won't help you to get to perfection. You'll be fighting on the basis of false ego. But if you fight on the basis of real ego, that you're an eternal servant of Krishna, a God, and that despite what my mind is telling me to do, and even my emotions, the right thing to do, what I should do, what I must do, is to follow Krishna's instructions. And that Arjuna will make that statement in a few verses, that by your mercy my illusion is now gone, and kadashe vachanang tava, I will act as you say. Now how does that pertain to us? Well, the Lord is saying in the form of Lord Chaitanya, You know, chant Hare Krishna, chant this mantra. He didn't make it up. It's from the Vedas. It's right there from the Kali Santana Upanishad. There's no better way than counteracting the evils and ills of this age than to chant this particular mantra. He said, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Iti Shodashakam Nam, Kali Kalmasha Nashanam, Natak Parataropaya, Sarva Vedeshu Drishyate. So Vedeshu Drishyate means you look throughout the Vedas, vast, all the 4 Vedas and the Puranas and everything. So Kalmasha, Kali Kalmasha means the problems, the difficulties caused by the age of Kali, which we are very familiar with. We see them everywhere. Nashanam, it destroys those. It opens up the path. In other words, it's feasible for us to do. We don't have to practice hours and hours of yoga, hatha yoga, sitting alone, the breathing. It's impossible for us. It's certainly here in San Diego, you have to go off somewhere. So you don't need to get off. Just get off at the exit and come down Grand Avenue, and here you are. You're in your yoga environment now. This is the yoga, most simple form of yoga. It's spoken by Kapila Dev. Vijubir Yoga Margai. It means the most easy form of yoga. What is it? Getting together and hearing about Krishna and chanting about Krishna. That's what he says. Satam prasangan mama virya samvido pavantiritkan rasayana kata tajoshanat asu abavarga vartmanam shraddha ratir bhakta anukramishati. This Satam Prasangan is Sadhu Sangha. This Satam are the devotees. So in the association, and not just milling around, in a room, but Prasanga means meaningful association, hearing and chanting with attention. What will you hear? Mama Virya, Samvido, conversation, vibration about my glories. This is Kapila Dev speaking. He's none different from Krishna. Bhavanti Ritkana Rasayana. Rit is the heart, Karna is the ear. Rasayana, it's like a life-giving elixir. These vibrations from the Sat, not just from anyone. Life-giving elixir. Bhavanti Ritkan Rasayana Kata, that's the talks, the sounds. Tadjoshanat Ashu, by engaging in this process quickly, one will move very quickly on the path of liberation from birth and death, which we've been suffering now for millions of births. Apavarga Vartmani, and along the way you'll develop Shraddha. Who knows what Shraddha is? Faith. That's the first thing, faith. Rati, attraction for Krishna, attraction for everything related to Krishna, devotees. And then Bhakti, talking about and pure devotion. It will develop by this one process of hearing and chanting, which is the essence of Sankirtan. Bhakta Rahu, the word Sankirtan. Can you analyze it for us? What are those two? What does San and Kirtan mean? Kirtan,
Yeah, Kirtan. San is like what is it, distributing? No.
In this context, the prefix san means complete. Just like sannyas. Sannyas means total renunciation. Nyas is renunciation, san is total renunciation. So Sankirtan means congregational chanting, Daniel, with lots of dancing. And that's an important part of it. He's our main dancer. Yeah, and he's our second dancer. You know that he studied ballet? For real. For true. Anyway, nobody's barred. Anyone can participate, Very powerful process. So that's what Kapila Dev is recommending. Rijubir Yoga Margai, the easiest process of yoga. Purifies the heart, brings you closer to Krishna, very pleasing. Susukam Kartamabhyam, happily performed. So that's how we can conquer over the false ego. Otherwise, we're going to be engaged by nature in acting some way or other that's not for our benefit. Okay. Any questions on this verse? Okay, let's go on. Text 60. Swabhava jena kaunteya nibbadha svena karmana kartum nechasi mohat karishyas yavashopitat. Under illusion, you are now declining to act according to my direction. But, compelled by the work born of your own nature, you will act all the same, O son of Kunti. Purport. If one refuses to act under the direction of the Supreme Lord, then he is compelled to act by the modes in which he is situated. Everyone is under the spell of a particular combination of the modes of nature and is acting in that way. But anyone who voluntarily engages himself under the direction of the Supreme Lord becomes glorious. So once again, we refer back to our favorite verse from the 13th chapter. Purushak pakatisto hi bhunkte pakati jangonan karanang gurasangosya sadasad yoni janmasu. This verse describes how we attain a different destination in our next life. The first point in the Bhagavad Gita is that we never die. Nobody dies, but we will undergo the trauma of bodily death and take on another birth. But in this body, in the human form, we can decide how we interact with nature, and we can get a much better body that's conducive for making further steps and getting out of this trap of birth and death. So this verse says in the 13th chapter, Purusha, that's the living entity who's trying to enjoy this world. That's the soul. Prakritisto hi is situated in Prakriti, material energy. And Bhunkte, he's experiencing Prakriti Jangunan, the three modes of material nature, the gunas that are born of nature, Prakriti Jangunan. And here's the key words. Karanam gunasangosya. Gunasanga means how we associate with those modes is the cause of sadasadyoni janmasu, our birth in good or bad situation. We can lose this human form of life entirely. If we act like animals, don't control the senses, simply concerned with eating, sleeping, mating, defending, then what do we need a human body for? We can lose that. So Bhagavad Gita is providing this essential knowledge of how we can act, not only to remain human beings, but to move along the path to get out of birth and death entirely. So it all depends on what we choose to do and what modes we act in. Just like, for instance, eating, right? It's a free country. We can we can go down to Rouse and buy whatever we want. There's a whole section there of dairy products, and there's also a section of meat products. There's all kinds of foods you can buy. But devotees, no, well, we're not going to eat any meat. Because, millions of people who aren't devotees understand that that's a bad thing to do. It's bad for your health, it's bad for the planet, it's certainly bad for the animals that you're eating. It's all in all, it's just a bad proposition. And now, anyway, it's just, there's no need for it. Plus you don't need it. So that's a very important choice. If one actually makes the choice to become a vegetarian, regardless of anything else you do, you'll be much more receptive to this knowledge. That was certainly true for me. I was a total atheist, and I would never even consider. It's funny because I was living in the Lower East Side in 1968, 2 years after the movement was started. They still had the temple on 2nd Avenue. They'd moved from 26 to 68 or something, a little bigger quarters. And the devotees would come dancing down the street. And I was kind of a neo-hippie, I'd wander around, I was playing the flute and playing my drum and I'd hear them, oh, that's a good beat, maybe I could jam with them, And then I'd turn the corner, God, it's the Hare Krishnas, forget it, I was completely, and I was, an omnivore, it didn't make any sense to me, it had no attraction. But then I went through some trauma, I got very sick, I was in the hospital with hepatitis, and when I came out, I said, I got to take care of my health. And by that time, I'd become aware. I hadn't tried it, but of yoga. And fortunately, I went to the studio in New York City. I lived on the island. And I went there to Amala Bhakta's, then the later Amala Bhakta's studio. He's now Amala Bhakta Swami. I just saw him in L.A. He's up there. He's almost 90 years old now. And anyway, I'm not going to go through my whole story, but the point is, I was open to it, and he was teaching, Hatha Yoga, but there was also a philosophy side to it. And I learned one mantra. It was a Krishna mantra. Anyone who gets initiated, or a bit of initiation, to hear it. Om abhavitrak pavitova sarvavastam kratopiya yaksmaret pundarikaksha sambhayabhyandara shuchihi. I don't know if you know what this means. You know what it is. So it says, Om, it's a Vedic mantra. Whether impure or pure, one who remembers the lotus-eyed Lord, Pundarikaksha, is the name for Krishna, becomes purified inside and out. Pundarikaksha Sabhaya Abhyantarachati means externally and internally. So I didn't even know what it meant, but somehow I would, on my drive back home to Long Island, I would be chanting that mantra, you know. And I didn't know what's going on, but somehow I became more interested in Krishna, you know. and it was just Krishna's arrangement, whatever. Sometimes he'll put you through a lot of trouble, so that you're shaken up in your natural routine, and then you become more interested in spiritual life. So, Krishna is saying now, what is it? Under illusion, you now decline to act. So you're going to act anyway because you have a certain nature, as a Kshatriya nature. Arjuna was a great fighter, you know. But if he acts not on Krishna's order, but just on the impelling of the nature, then he's not going to get the result. He needs to act consciously on Krishna's order and give up his hesitancy. You will act all the same. And as Prabhupada makes clear, if you're compelled to act, you're going to be compelled to act by the modes of nature. Everyone is under the spell of a particular combination of the modes of nature and is acting in that way. So, okay, so we're conditioned. Every one of us is conditioned. We have a certain mode of activity and things we like to do and all these things. So, if we don't have another inspiring force that comes within our heart and gives us a direction that means that we have to do things that we may not like to do, and we have to give up some things that we like to do, knowing that is for our best benefit. We do that all the time. Just think, what does it mean to get a higher education? It's a big austerity. Nowadays, the biggest sacrifice is going into debt. You know, facing, right? But I mean, you can't be partying all the time. It's not, I got to look for the best party school and go to that. Well, what's that? The use of that? You go into debt and you won't have, anything. So, but it means that, you have to work. You have to, not just play. You have to, for a future benefit, you do certain things, you give certain things up. Anything is like that. So how much more that's true for perfection in spiritual life. And so there's a whole series of do's and don'ts that if we were serious, we embrace them. Okay, I have faith, and that's why it's so important to be in touch with advanced devotee, preferably a pure devotee, to give an example of what spiritual life really is. And we saw that with Srila Prabhupada. Even though he was so elderly, he was so peaceful and so blissful in so many circumstances. Even when he had a stroke, he was in the hospital. He didn't lose his composure. He wasn't lamenting and crying or anything. He was just basically thinking, how can I get out of this hospital? Because they wanted to keep poking him, and he didn't want that. He had his own means of curing. Eventually, he went back to India and the Ayurveda. But he came back to America as soon as he could, because by that time he had a few centers and devotees, and they were writing him, and that's where his heart was. And he underwent so many austerities in the elder age, not caring. We just saw, as I mentioned this morning, this devotee Sura, who just passed away on the 2nd of this month. He had that spirit against all the odds and the growing difficulties. He had serious diabetes. He was still preaching, going out, chanting, taking care of the accounts for the BBT. He was going against the difficulties that were coming with his disease. And we saw with Rajendranandana too. So much pain he was in there, but still he was keeping his consciousness, chanting, wasn't. So that it gives you great strength. Krishna gives you strength from within, and that's what he promises back in text 58, was it? Yeah. Matchitta sabadurgani matpasada tadishisi. If you become conscious of me, that means progressively more and more remembering Krishna throughout our day, you will pass over all the obstacles of conditioned life by my grace. And have to have examples of that. We say, well, it's possible that we can do that. And what does it mean to overcome them, to get to the point of equipoise that he described in this way back in the 2nd chapter? What is he? You remember Arjuna asked, what is someone whose consciousness is steady in transcendence and Krishna consciousness? How does he walk? How does he talk? How does he sit? What is? And Krishna gives wonderful answers. I memorized those verses many years ago. It says, Prajahati yada kaman sarvan parta manogatan atmaneva tushta stita pragyasta doshite. One whose consciousness is stita. Stita means fixed. that all of the things that are going around don't fix you. You're fixed at Krishna's lotus feet. Perfect example, Prahlad Maharaj, Haridas Thakur, great devotees who were so fixed nothing could move them. So Prijahati means throwing away without any hesitation all these material sense gratifications, these illusions. Sarvan Parta Manogatan, which arise from the mind. Atmaneva Manatushta, being satisfied in the self, means being satisfied simply in thinking of Krishna, glorifying Krishna, and serving Krishna, the super self, the original self of the self. That's what it means to be satisfied in the self. This is one symptom. You can see it. Dukeshvanudvignamana, when the difficulties in this world don't disturb one's equipoise. Udvigna. Udvigna is what's happening all the time. This pandemic has disturbed people's minds all over the world. Udvignamana. And why not? Suddenly we're faced with this invisible threat, and you die in the most horrible way, suffocating. You're not with your loved ones, they can't even visit you. It's a nightmare. It's affected everybody. So here, one of the symptoms, dukeshu means miseries, anudvignamana, one remains fixed in mind. How? Because I'm not going to die. I'll never die. Let me just remember Krishna. At that last time, we had devotees in the beginning, and when it started in 2020. Remember Bhakti Charu Swami? He was one of the first devotees to suffer, demise from that. And he had so many things going for him. He had things playing. They were calling him, and he remembered Krishna at the time. So you got to leave sometime. So if you're in good consciousness, if you've practiced all your life and you have your friends who can help you remember Krishna, Prabhupada showed his house surrounded by devotees chanting Hare Krishna, then you can go back to Godhead. No more to be bound up in the material body. So Sukeshu Vigataspaha. On the other side, not allowing the allurements of material pleasure to disrupt you also. Remaining fixed. I don't need that. I have Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Of sweet things, it's the sweetest. You will taste it any time. If you really are able to develop that appreciation for the holy name, then the material allurements can't allure you. That's Yadavadi Mama Chaitya Krishna Padaravind. There's a Yamunacharya describing. Even when I think of, he was a king, he had so many opportunities for sense gratification. When he thinks of all that sex life, he just spit at the thought. It's not attractive to think about. You're attracted to Krishna, who's all attractive. That's what his name means. But we have to retrain our mind to be satisfied in hearing about glorifying, serving Krishna. And it's possible. So I'm not going to go through all of those, but it's worth studying. Way back in the second chapter. I'll just give you the reference if you're interested. Because the second chapter is a nice summary of everything in the book. And that's where we are.
Pragmatika Bhasha, is that
56, 256, I just said 255, 56, 57 talks about the tortoise or the turtle who withdraws his senses when he's not using them. That's there in text 58 and 59. Such an important verse. We could artificially renounce something, but the taste for it will remain, and eventually we'll go back to it. How many people have tried to give up cigarettes? And they'll say, yes, I have. 10 times I tried to, I gave up cigarettes. But the taste remains. But devotees who are serious, you could, by chanting Hare Krishna, it's difficult, it's strong, but you can do it. You can give up anything. All right, moving along. Text 61 is very famous for us. Prabhupada quoted it all the time about the super soul in the heart. Ishvara sarva bhutanam viddesher junatishtati brahmayan sarva bhutani yantrarudhani mayaya. The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities, who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. Purport. Arjuna was not the supreme knower, and his decision to fight or not to fight was confined to his limited discretion. Lord Krishna instructed that the individual soul is not all in all. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, or he himself, Krishna, as the localized supersoul, sits in the heart directing the living being. After changing bodies, the living entity forgets his past deeds, but the supersoul, as the knower of the past, present, and future, remains the witness of all his activities. Therefore, all the activities of living entities are directed by this supersoul. The living entity gets what he deserves and is carried by the material body, which is created in the material energy under the direction of the supersoul. As soon as the living entity is placed in a particular type of body, he has to work under the spell of that bodily situation. Okay. A person seated in a high-speed motor car goes faster than one seated in a slower car, though the living entities, the drivers, may be the same. Similarly, by the order of the Supreme Soul, material nature fashions a particular type of body to a particular type of living entity so that he may work according to his past desires. The living entity is not independent. One should not think himself independent of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The individual is always under the Lord's control. Therefore, one's duty is to surrender, and that is the injunction of the next verse. So this, Prabhupada would love to quote this verse, that in every living entity is the Ishvara, the real controller, the Supersoul. Where is he? Hriddeshe, in the area of the heart. Brahmayan Tavabhutani, we're all wandering. We're wandering through different species, through different planets, different circumstances. Many, many lifetimes. And what's the vehicle? We're wandering on the bodies, which are like yantras. Yantras mean the machine. Every one of our bodies is a very complicated machine. Sometimes we forget, how incredible this. The human body and every organism, for me, is right there is the proof of the existence of God. It's just so incredibly complex, and what's the temperature? 98.6. I learned that when I was a kid. There must be so many things going on in it to keep that temperature around there, isn't it? That itself is amazing. And there's so many organs and things working together, the bloodstream, and we're learning a little bit about it from this pandemic. The viruses and the things have to, and we have the antibodies and the T cells and all this stuff going on. And to think, it just happened by evolution, by chance, it's completely crazy. Nothing like that could happen by chance. Obviously, there's an intelligence behind it. And all so that we can have an organism, we can have a body to spend our little time in and interact with this material world and try to enjoy. But the whole meaning of it, the whole purpose of it, is that when we get to the human form of life, we inquire about where do we come from, what's the meaning of all this craziness. Is it, it's not just a tale told by an idiot signifying nothing. That's the view of someone who has no transcendental vision. It signifies everything. In other words, that's what this verse is all about. That the Lord is in everyone's heart, and He's trying to speak to us. He's trying to teach us what's good for us, but we don't want to know that. We want to know, how can I get this? How can I do this? How can I escape from this? Where's food? Where's it? And He'll give us that intelligence. But it's not what He wants. He has also separate desires. So how can we find out really what's best for us, what God has in mind for us? That's what the Bhagavad Gita is all about. Krishna is speaking to Arjuna. Arjuna represents us. His calculation not to fight was moral to some extent, right? It looked good. He didn't want to fight and cause disruption in society. He had all these reasons, Vedic one, based on the Vedas. But the whole basis of the calculation was wrong, because it's not what Krishna wanted. He knew what was best, and that was that all of these demonic soldiers, that they'd be removed from society, so that Dharma could be reinstated. He didn't want that, originally, but the other side was completely obstinate, Duryodhana's side. So that's what's necessary. So by our own calculation, if we try to figure it out, we're just going to make a mistake and stay entangled in the material world. So we need to find out what we should do. Only human beings can have a should. Should means that it may go against your your material desires, but it's the proper thing to do and you want to do it. That's element comes in human life, morality. And so Arjuna, as he said, Dharma Samudra Cheta, that I'm bewildered about what I should do, Dharma. So I'm asking you, Krishna, now as your disciple, not as your friend, please tell me for certain what's the right thing for me to do. That's there in that Karpa Nidosha verse. So how to know for certain and be fully confident, that's the faith, that's the Shraddha. That we have to consult with the book. And Krishna is coming to the climax here in text 65, 66, where he summarizes all of the instruction in those two verses. So we'll get to that soon. All right, it's kind of late. We have time for one little shloka. Daniel, go ahead, one little question.
Thank you, Dravida.
Hurry up.
Okay, anyways, so my question is just that we have all these different processes of like, yoga, and then you also have these different practices of just like, for I guess like the body you'd say, or the mind, or just trying to control and contain. Now, being Bhakti Yoga being the highest process, and being like the best process for attaining, liberation and having that supreme love for Krishna. My question is it okay to use those other processes to help like with like the body's needs if it needs
but
to?
that's proved. I mean, Prabhupada took a walk every day. He got a massage every day. And so there's definitely scope for keeping the bodily machine nice and fit and healthy. So there's a room for it, but it has to be, controlled. It can't get too out of. So, I mean, there's one pastime where Prabhupada was on a walk. I think he must have been in India. I think in Bombay somewhere, and they saw someone standing on his head, outside. And one of the boys said, "Oh boy, Barbara, we don't do any of that. So you should try it sometime. It's pretty good for you. In other words, he appreciated these things in their proper place, and because they can be very good. Just like the massage, he said was saving his life practically. So we shouldn't neglect that part, but there's a place for it, a place for it. Yeah, control. Do you want to say something? Yeah, one. Okay, real quick because we're running out of time.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. So I wanted to ask about the increase in human population, which is resulting in destruction of a lot of species around the world. How do we translate it from the spiritual point of view? That why are so many souls taking human life form, and it's just increasing with time?
Yeah, well, it may decrease now. Have you been reading? People, the fertility is going down. So the main problem is that there's no direction to it. It's just happening on the basis of gross sex desire and opportunity like that. And the real problem is there's the real bottleneck because no one's going back to Godhead. All these souls are graduating the human form of life and then staying there. That's one problem. But I wouldn't worry about that too much. That there are certain things that take care of that, unfortunately, like pandemics sometimes, wars and things. But we should try to become as well versed in the knowledge ourselves, follow it carefully, and spread it so that as many people as possible can start on the way back to Godhead. Because whatever you do is never lost. It's the greatest welfare work. Just sitting in one class, because forget what I said, but we read the book, so it's perfect. Yeah, you come. The curtains will open in about 2 minutes, and therefore we have to adjourn. Hare Krishna. All glory to Srila Prabhupada.